Thanks, PMS Bazaar. Thanks, Sharmila, for a wonderful introduction. Uh, I will try to keep this short and I will try to not go over the same data points that everybody has been talking about since morning. Since this is a full day, Indian fund managers, and by default, all Indian fund managers are going to be bullish on India. So you'll keep hearing the same statistics over and over. But I will try and provide a perspective which is on manufacturing, which is hopefully slightly different than whatever has been covered till now. So, but before we begin, and there is no secret about what I'm presenting on, but before we begin, just a brief introduction for those who missed out on what ValueQuest is about. Sorry, this is the agenda that we are planning to cover today. Indian imperative. It is important and almost inevitable that India focuses on manufacturing. Government push, there is a gap between the cup and the lip. What history tells us and how world is conspiring in favor of India. It's an idea that its time has come. But before that, just a very quick snapshot of what ValueQuest is. We are a portfolio management service provider since 2010, 12 years plus track record. We've recently got our approval for CAT2 private equity fund, about AUM of about 625 million USD, and a TWRR of, since inception, of about 17.5% with a strong 15 people research team. This is our flagship scheme that has handsomely beaten the benchmark BSE 500 by 2x almost. And this is our second scheme. The earlier scheme was a 12-year vintage. This is an 8-year vintage. And even this particular scheme has is roughly about 2x. So without any further ado, let me get straight into what is this Indian imperative? Why do we need to focus on manufacturing? I'm sure all of you have had some brush or other with the manufacturing industry in India, and you do have a strong view about it. It has been a story that has deceived to flattered many times over. So post-independence, if you see, the blue line is the services sector and the orange line is the manufacturing sector. The contribution to the GDP has pretty much remained stagnant or probably even declined. It is close to around 10-11%, while the services has gone from 20% to almost 40%. So, and just to give you a perspective, most of the Asian economies also have a contribution which is higher than India. Some of our poorer cousins around the country, around the border, also have a higher contribution of manufacturing to the GDP. So we must have done something really, really bad to have this kind of contribution of manufacturing. Not only that, we run a very large trade deficit. We have $190 billion worth of trade deficit. Of course, large part of it is because we are energy importers. So, but even if you leave out the gold and oil imports, the kind of manufactured goods and electronics that we import is really killing us. And that is one of the reasons why we keep hearing about rupee depreciation, because we don't produce enough of the goods that we consume. The second largest contributor to the trade deficit is electronics, which is $60 billion out of the $190 billion. If you leave out oil, second largest contribution is electronics. So this is just a too busy a slide, but the simple point that I'm making is that India has nearly 50-60% less mid-sized companies as per $1 trillion as compared to any of its peers, whether it is Korea, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand. They have a far higher number of medium-sized companies per $1 trillion of GDP than India does. So services is great. Services has done very well for us, and it employs only less than 1/3 of the India's population. The contribution of India's manufacturing sector is nothing. I just spoke about that. And there is a wide variation even amongst the states. There are only 3 states, so to say, which have any kind of manufacturing which can be compared to global standards, which is Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Tamil Nadu. So severely underdeveloped manufacturing sector. We need to hasten the manufacturing. Why? Because it is the single most important factor that has alleviated poverty as well as agricultural unemployment in most of the countries wherever industrialization has happened. it increases trade, and of course, it brings in foreign investment. So the number of reasons why we need to manufacture is more than enough. We need to reduce import dependence. We need to generate employment, enable energy transition, as well as transition from agrarian to industrialized country, to have self-dependence on key defense, pharma, and key starting raw materials, to reduce the trade imbalance, and obviously to finally boost the economy. So our development till now has been quite lopsided. So we lost a few decades of the initial post-independence era to some wrong choices made, where we went the socialist way. Then we realigned, we liberalized the economy, but post-liberalization, all the focus has been on export-oriented services sector, not so much on the manufacturing sector. So we need to now focus on the manufacturing. So the imperative is well known to the Indian government. They understand that we need to go from 10, 11% to 25% of the GDP. They understand we need to create 10 crore jobs. They understand that no country has become a middle income or a higher income country without getting industrialized. So they need to build a global supply chain which is strong enough, and we need to have global champions. We need to become basically Atmanirbhar, as the word is in Hindi, which is self-dependent. And we need to incentivize and create economies of scale. So what are some of the initiatives that government has taken? Again, I'm not going to take you through the laundry list of everything that government has done, but just a key flavor of how this thinking has been. So we started off with the 2014 Make in India program. There was a lot of intent, but nothing really materialized if you were to take a look at the key parameters. But that told you which way this government was thinking and where we are headed. Eventually, of course, they have learned, and they have been learning and building on it. So subsequently, they did introduce a purchase manufacturing program, national policy on electronics. They also brought in a cluster policy. And of course, gradually, they have been providing enough protection to the Indian entrepreneur through basic customs duty to give them a level playing field in the initial, rather than a little bit of push to start competing at the global scale. So this was the beginning of the intent, but it further got clarified going forward that there were just too many sectors. Make in India was just a motherhood statement rather than a on-the-ground policy. There were many problems with it. So the refinement of the policy led to some champion sectors being selected on which the government will focus, and they will try to create out of those champion sectors some champion companies. So chemicals, pharma, industrial machinery, electronics, automotive, textile apparel were chosen as the sectors to focus on. And again, even that was not enough to start delivering. So there have been many steps in the process. So I like to believe that this government is going all out, is focusing. There are Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed is how it is called in Chanakya Niti, which is pulling out all stops to ensure that, that government, finally we get the results that we are looking for from the manufacturing sector. So when I say Sam, essentially it is government is trying to cajole you. They will provide you with a level playing field. Dam is essentially where they provide you with a financial incentive. Dand is essentially they punish you if you are not following the mandate. And Bhed is, of course, where they provide a policy which is actually differentiated, and we'll just quickly take a look at what exactly I mean by that. So top 15 regions by total number of discriminatory intervention. So India is one of the highest in terms of the number of interventions it is doing in the trade policies. And it is against all the major economies. So that tells you that they are trying to create an environment where Indian entrepreneurs feel safe and have some amount of edge while competing globally. Again, most favored nation, simple tariff. If you see the highest tariffs is, India is one of the country which has the highest amount of tariff. Tax rate cut in August of 2019 to 15%, the corporate tax cut, was the first time where the intent became very clear that they want to incentivize the corporates to come down and start manufacturing over here. And so if the levelizing or the giving that initial push didn't work, they started giving more financial incentive as well. Then Dand. This is actually only the defense sector, but it gives you the intent that if you're not going to be succeeding, even with the financial incentive, even with the level playing field, then I'm going to make it mandatory. You cannot import. So they have put in a import embargo on 1,200 plus defense items. So, and the order of in which you can start ordering. First, you have to look for an Indian designed and domestically manufactured defense good. If not, then you have to buy Indian. If not, then you have to buy but make in India. Then you might buy globally, but you have to manufacture in India. And last, if you're unable to procure your equipment through any of those routes, then you can go for the last one, which is buy global. And then I believe the game changer is PLI. Of course, it's not like PLI has succeeded everywhere, but PLI is essentially a scheme where they have incentivized scale for the first time. And basically, instead of giving 100 rupees to 100 companies, where you're distributing 1 rupee to each, and it does not necessarily create the scale that we are looking for. What government is trying to do is spread those 100 rupees over 10 companies, which can possibly become the global champions. We will have our own version of the chaebols, as in South Korea, as we have seen large conglomerate arising. We might not be in that, that kind of a conglomerates where only 4 or 5 houses dominate the entire economy, but some version of that is where we are headed towards. But PLI is definitely has tilted the scale in favor of manufacturing in India, and the early signs are already visible in some of the sectors like electronics and mobile manufacturing. Naysayers will say that it is only an assembly, low work, low value added job. That's fine, but that's how you start. You've got to start somewhere. So this is, again, a very busy slide, but the point is that we have already signed a lot of FTA, free trade agreements. We are becoming part of major trading blocks. There are few on the horizon. The pace of becoming part of these trading blocks, we would like it to be faster than it is, but at the same time, we are at least headed in the right direction. Yeah, so these are all the laundry list of the FTAs that we are in the process of signing. UK is the next big one coming. EU will probably take some time, and US is the one big that is pending. Having said this, there is a need for India to focus on manufacturing, and the government is taking steps, but there is still a lot of reality check that we all need to see. There is a gap between the lip and the cup, and I'm sure all of us are Indians, and we are constantly bothered by traffic, lack of, and dealing with government agencies, bureaucracy, corruption, everything is there. So let's get a reality check on what exactly. So India's manufacturing sector is hamstrung by many ills, from poor roads, unreliable power supply, burdensome regulation. So how can we even hope and dream of competing with Vietnam, let alone China? We cannot dream of competing with China at this point of time. So these are some of the ills that we are suffering from. Logistics and infra is obviously the number one thing, and within that, time and cost are the two biggest things. A ship that comes to the port to JNPT used to take 12 days, probably still takes many number of days to turn around, because the draft is just not deep enough. The regulations and the process at the port is very cumbersome, while in China, in their largest port, you can probably turn the ship around in less than 12 hours. So there's a long way to go. The mix that India has of transportation is very much skewed in favor of road, which is not very competitive. The fuel cost is high. We need to start focusing more towards railway. Railway will reduce the cost a lot. And of course, the utilization of the truck fleets is on the lower side. So again, the intent is very clear. The PM Gati Shakti is a plan introduced where we are trying to bring the logistics cost down. Today, logistics cost for India is about 16% of the GDP. We are trying to bring it down to 8 to 10%. It is going to take time, but the vision has been laid out and the work has begun towards that. All those things are physical assets, and sooner or later we will have them. But the biggest problem India faces today in terms of realizing its manufacturing dream is the softer aspects of having education and R&D. We do not, even though we produce 5 lakh graduates, barely 3, 4, 5% of that are actually employable on day one. Everybody else needs extra training. Our expenditure on R&D is abysmal. So to say, even China is not too far, but we are still, in context of the size of China's economy, 2.1% is a big number. Women are missing in workforce. This green line essentially represents the gap, gender gap that we have. So we have the highest gender gap, and we also have the lowest women participation in the economy. So this is something that we need to take care of. As I mentioned earlier, we might be producing a lot of engineers, but pertinent talent is missing. And the last but not the least, the big trouble that we have is that our judiciary system is really, really flawed, at least in terms of the backlog of cases, the time taken. Most of the companies, this is the number one reason why most companies choose not to come to India, is because if they get into a commercial disagreement with their partner, then it is going to be a long drawn affair. So again, over here, the work has started. There is an intent from the CJI as well as from the government to reform judiciary, to make it accessible, accountable, efficient, transparent, and independent. But this is probably going to, if I had to pick on one particular thing that is going to take the longest to reform, this is the one that is going to take the most time. Labor reform, sorry, that was not the last one. We have one more, which is labor reforms. Labor reforms is going to be a challenge again, but at the same time, this is not central government's challenge, so much so it is state government's challenge. India is finally a federal structure, and land and labor are state topics. So at some point of time, the competitive federalism will kick in, and hopefully the labor reforms will also happen. And they have started happening, where even states like Rajasthan have started giving, reforming the labor sector. So consolidation of various acts into one bill, minimum wage code. Competitive federalism is something that is not enshrined in our constitution, but it is something that the executive has chosen. Honestly speaking, this is not a hurdle as much as it's an enabler, but it is also one of the reasons why some of the reforms take longer to implement, because you have to get the states on board. Like for example, GST took the longest of time to get implemented, because you have to get each and every state on board. But finally, we do have a unified tax regime, and it is now working beautifully. There were some initial hiccups in the implementation period, but now it's running smoothly, and we are seeing GST numbers go up day by day, which tells you that it's working fine. And of course, even the devolution from central government to the state is happening, and they are giving out more money than expected also in some case, and sooner also. So competitive federalism for India is a good thing, and it's happening. What does history tell us? Now, when I say history, I'm talking about the history of the various parts of the world which have been industrialized in the past. So all countries that have been industrialized have gone, all countries that have moved up the chain in terms of prosperity have gone through some amount of industrialization. You will not find too many examples of countries that have not industrialized and have become rich. So if India has to become economic superpower, there is absolutely no choice but to have a very vibrant manufacturing sector. The playbook or the framework that has been common through all these industrialization stories has been that there has been a lot of technology improvement that has happened, cheap labor, moving away from agrarian state, and of course, at some point, supply chain making a big move. So similar setup to what is happening today. So this is just an example. I mean, if I were to tell you that which country is this, which is at the crossroad between dominant global powers at conflict, has been blockaded by one for trading with the other. There are long hours of work, poor conditions of work, environment is bad. You can apply these same things to probably India today. But this is actually United States of 1700s. You might not believe, but USA in 1700s, UK and France were the two giant powers. US had started trading with Napoleonic France, and UK did not like that. So they were actually guarding all the manufacturing technologies very, very closely. And it was a time when 80% of US was agrarian. So there was a big move away from agrarian to industrialization. Second, even Germany post-World War. You know, today, 20 years back, I'm sure you remember that any goods manufactured in China were considered as low quality. But today we don't talk about it that way. And I'm sure you'll be surprised that Germany was considered a poor cousin. Any goods manufactured in Germany was supposed to be poor quality. Today, you and I will not believe we swear by the German engineering standards. But that was not the case when the industrialization had just begun in Germany. They were actually stealing all technology from UK. And Germany was the first copy cousin of UK. Or China under Deng Xiaoping, similar story. Again, agrarian society and so much of trouble. I mean, there were famines and so much of death and destruction around. And he had to bring the whole populace out of the poverty. And that was when they moved towards the manufacturing and industrialization. All of the above could be the same template. It has happened all over the world, from Germany, Japan, Korea. South Korea revved up the 1960s by the ascent of chaebols. So again, the point I'm making is similar kind of conditions persisted in every major country that has industrialized. And it is not like you get it right in the first go. Even China in 1980s when it started, finally China's pickup started probably a decade later, post-90s, when they finally became part of the global supply chain. And even at that point of time, the acceptance of Chinese manufactured goods in the world was very low. But eventually they did take up, and today we know that China is a global manufacturing superpower. So industrialization is the path to prosperity. Many countries have gone through the same curve. Same factors are facing India today, and India has to industrialize. So coming to the final point that I want to make is that manufacturing renaissance in India is an inevitability. We can discuss about the pace, and we can discuss about when will it happen, how will it happen, how much it will happen, but it is going to happen for sure. So this is a dialogue from the movie Om Shanti Om, where it's in Hindi, it says that कहते हैं अगर किसी चीज को दिल से चाहो तो पूरी कायनात उसे तुमसे मिलाने की कोशिश करती है. Essentially what it means is, if you really want something badly, then the whole world conspires to make it happen. And that's exactly what is happening. So the number one point over here is China's demographic collapse. Of course, we all are aware of the one-child policy that China implemented in 1970s. But just take a look. 1980s, they had a very broad base of young kids, 0 to 4. And look at the last bar, how it has been shrinking. Suddenly, we are going to have China, which will be young and old, but the middle working age population is going to become lesser and lesser. While India, on the other hand, is going to face a demographic dividend, which is, well, of course, we have to still get them jobs, but we will have 80% of the population which will be in the working age bracket. More than 60% is below the age of 35. This is how the chart is looking when you just extrapolate it out by a couple of decades. Green line is China's demographic working age population, and blue line is India's. The black line is where we are today. In next 5 years' time, India's working age population is going to exceed China. China has not only is going to have a demographic collapse, but it has also gone on to become a middle income country. The willingness to work in factory conditions is pretty much not there. So China polluted freely when it was implementing the manufacturing, industrialization. It favored manufacturing for 2 decades, but now it is focusing on becoming a consumption-based economy. Even the people are not willing to work. So it is not only that India wants to pull manufacturing, China also wants to reduce its dependence on manufacturing. This is just how much they polluted. China is one of the worst polluters of the world today, greenhouse gas emissions. China is world superpower. World has realized that they depend too much on China. 29% of the world's manufacturing happens in China. In each sector, if you see, the dominance is total from 40, 50, 60% to maybe even 90, 95%. Today, for example, in solar industry, almost 95% of the industry supply chain is from China. And world wants to move towards renewable. it cannot happen without China's acceptance. But China has been not very, very cooperative in that sense. These are the countries surrounding China with whom China has territorial disputes. Not to say, basically, it's not a very healthy relationship that they share with their neighbors. This is the number of retaliation that countries have had with China. China has the highest number of retaliation. Of course, it also manufactures the highest number of goods, so naturally there's going to be more. But still, even if you go country by country, you will see that more people want to put anti-dumping duties on China. And China is not afraid to use its trade as a geopolitical tool as well. It can coerce you into agreeing to other things which you don't not want to. The another thing is, of course, we all saw what the Ukraine and Russia war did. It basically shot up the energy costs in Europe, and it revealed and exposed how much they are dependent on Russia for energy. India, while on the other hand, has remained strategically neutral. Not too much. I cannot recall too many instances where two large blocks in the world are competing with each other, while India is actually neutral and gaining from it. We have been neutral in the past, but we have never gained from those policies. Of course, labor cost, though the importance of labor cost is increasingly going down with automation, robotics, AI, ML, but at the same time, there will still be enough number of jobs at the lower end which India can take up, because the cost arbitrage is just too much. India is competitive versus most of the major economies. This is just one, see, it's not like we are talking about a concept anymore. It is, this inquiries are becoming orders, timelines are getting reduced, and they are getting reflected in the order book already as we speak in most of the companies. Apple has just shifted 1% of its manufacturing to India, and it is looking to do far more. Entire ecosystem of Apple will come over here. So there is initial proof of the pudding already. This is a company, Boat is essentially an electronics company, and there is also their strategy. They were procuring 30% of the goods locally, which they moved to 70% this year, and by next year they'll be 90% procuring indigenously. So there is a movement even from most of the companies to manufacture or procure locally. So policy-wise, strong pull from India. Geopolitics-wise, it favors India. Economics-wise, it favors India. And demographics-wise, it favors India. So that's why world is conspiring to make India succeed in the manufacturing. And there are multiple growth engines. It's not like India is going to manufacture. India can contract manufacture for the world. It will replace it. There is import substitution, which we are already witnessing in chemicals and APIs. And we can do it for the exports market as well as for the domestic market. So India has the added advantage of having a domestic market which is large enough. The world wants to diversify away from China. China wants to diversify away from manufacturing. And India wants to diversify away from agriculture. And that is where the Indian manufacturing renaissance lies. Thank you.